When I was 6, my parents divorced, and my mom got custody of me and my older sister. From that point on, life became a constant struggle. My mom had mental health issues, likely borderline personality disorder, and a lot of narcissistic tendencies. Anytime things went wrong, she blamed my dad. If we were hungry or the bills weren't paid, she'd snap, "It's your father's fault. Go cry to him." We were too young to question it. By the time I was 8 and my sister was 10, we were the ones running the house. We'd come home from school, do homework, make dinner, and clean up. Asking for help from my mom wasn't an option. She'd either yell or tell us we were useless. And she reminded us constantly that we were worthless. This became our normal. Things got worse my senior year of high school. That summer, my grandma passed away and left my mom $75,000 in inheritance. Instead of using it wisely, my mom quit her job and blew through the money in a few months. She refused to work, made excuses, and spent her days drinking and hanging out with friends like a teenager. Meanwhile, I was trying to balance school, a part-time job, and taking care of her. When the power got shut off or there was no food, she'd say, "You have a job. Why don't you pay for it?" If I mentioned my dad's child support, she'd just brush it off or claim she was paying for my sister's tuition, which turned out to be a lie. She even joked about the child support, calling it "mommy's paycheck." By the time I was ready for college, it was obvious that she hadn't saved a dime to help me. She complained about how expensive college was, but she didn't offer any solutions. I couldn't afford private schools, so I picked an affordable state university. I was determined to make it work on my own, but the challenges were just getting started. In my first year, I managed to cover tuition and living expenses with a mix of part-time work, financial aid, and grants. But my mom still found ways to make things harder. My W-2 forms were mailed to her house, and instead of sending them to me, she shredded them. My sister, who happened to be visiting, caught her in the act. When I confronted her, she lied and said her CPA friend had them. Her friend later told me she'd never seen the forms, but she helped me file my taxes anyway so I could save my financial aid. This wasn't a one-time thing. The next year, my W-2s got lost again. I had to request duplicates, file my taxes late, and ended up missing out on some of my financial aid. My mom didn't care. Her response was always the same: "Complain to your father." By the summer before my 3rd year, I was done with her nonsense. I was working full-time, saving every dollar I could, while she refused to contribute to anything. She was mad at me for spending my money on a cell phone, and not the house phone she used for long-distance calls and chat rooms. To make it worse, she lied to her friends, saying I was lazy and wasn't trying hard enough in school. I ignored her and focused on my future. Move-in day came, and everything fell apart. The university told me I couldn't move into my dorm unless I paid 50% of my tuition up front, about $10,000. I didn't have it. Desperate, I called my dad. He showed up the next morning, loan papers in hand, and co-signed to cover the costs. He even paid the remaining balance himself. Over lunch, he told me something that changed everything. It turned out my dad had been paying $2,000 a month in child support, plus covering the mortgage and property taxes. My mom wasn't using that money for me or my sister. She was keeping it all for herself. My dad asked if I'd be okay with him stopping the payments to her and instead using the money directly for my college. I didn't even hesitate. I said yes. That conversation set everything in motion. After that conversation with my dad, things started to change. He told me he was going to file a motion with the court to redirect the child support payments toward my college expenses. He explained that since I lived on campus most of the year and my mom wasn't contributing to my education, there was no reason for her to keep getting the money. I didn't feel bad about it. For years, she had made me feel guilty for wanting anything, food, school supplies, or even a break from her demands. Now, the tables were turning. When my dad filed the motion, my mom was furious. She called me, screaming about how selfish I was for siding with him. She said I was ruining her life and accused me of being ungrateful. I didn't argue. I calmly reminded her that she always told me to complain to my dad, so that's what I did. That shut her up for a moment, but she quickly switched to guilt trips. "I never got to go to college right after high school," she said. You don't know how hard I've had it. Her complaints didn't change anything. My dad was prepared, and he had proof. He showed the court that he had been paying the mortgage, property taxes, and $2,000 a month in child support, while my mom wasn't using any of that money to help with tuition or living expenses for me or my sister. He even had bank statements and financial aid records to back it up. The judge agreed that it didn't make sense for her to keep receiving child support when I wasn't living at home and she wasn't supporting me. The court ruled in my dad's favor. He was allowed to stop the child support payments and take over my tuition directly. The judge also gave my mom an ultimatum: either take responsibility for the mortgage or agree to sell the house. She couldn't believe it. She called me again, crying and yelling about how unfair it was. "How am I supposed to live?" she asked. I told her the same thing she always told me: complain to Dad. After the court ruling, my mom's behavior became even more spiteful. She stopped paying the utility bills on the house, claiming she couldn't afford them. She told me the water and electricity had been shut off, and that if I wanted to come home for winter break, I'd have to help her out financially. By then, I was done playing her games. I told her I'd stay with my dad instead. That winter break was the first time I felt like I could breathe. My dad, stepmom, and younger half-siblings welcomed me with open arms. My dad even got me a part-time job at his office, so I could earn some extra money. Meanwhile, my mom was furious. She called me, accusing me of abandoning her during the holidays. I reminded her that the utilities were off at her house, and that she had told me not to come unless I could help pay the bills. She didn't have much to say after that. The real kicker came when my dad told me how much he was saving by taking over my tuition. Even with my financial aid, the remaining costs were about $6,000 a year. That was far less than the $24,000 he had been paying my mom annually in child support. He laughed and said, "I should have done this years ago." My mom tried to retaliate by dragging her feet on the house sale. She refused to clean or make repairs, hoping to delay the process. But the court didn't give her much choice. Eventually, the house was sold, and she had to move. She relocated to another state, but not before burning through whatever money she got from the sale. By then, I had learned to keep my distance. I didn't rely on her for anything anymore, and I was closer to my dad and stepmom than ever before. Looking back, I realized just how much my mom had taken from me and my sister, not just financially, but emotionally. For years, she manipulated us into thinking we were responsible for her happiness and well-being. But the truth was, we were the only reason she even had a roof over her head. If it weren't for the child support and the sacrifices my dad made, she would have had nothing. By the time I graduated college, my relationship with my mom was hanging by a thread. We still talked occasionally, but I kept my guard up. I had learned the hard way that trusting her only led to disappointment. After the court ruling and the house sale, my mom's life began to unravel further. She moved in with her boyfriend temporarily, but the relationship didn't last. By then, she had burned through every safety net she had: my dad's child support, my grandmother's inheritance, and even the proceeds from selling the house. She called me often during this time, alternating between guilt trips and outright demands for money. She wanted me to move to her new city and take care of her. I refused. "You're my daughter," she'd say, "and daughters are supposed to take care of their mothers." I'd just laugh. "You're not even 50, perfectly healthy, and you refuse to work. You don't need me. You need a job." That didn't sit well with her, but by then, I was done being manipulated. My mom's financial situation continued to decline. She bounced from one relative's guest room to another, but her refusal to contribute or find work eventually wore out her welcome. Relatives stopped helping, and she ended up in a shelter before finally moving into subsidized housing. She still called to complain about her situation, blaming everyone but herself for how things turned out. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward. My dad and stepmom supported me through the rest of college, not just financially, but emotionally. My dad made sure I filed my FAFSA on time every year, even picking up my W-2s himself to prevent my mom from interfering again. With their help, I graduated on time and debt-free. After college, I stayed close with them and grew even closer to my half-siblings. They became the family I had always wanted, but never thought I'd have. But my mom wasn't done trying to guilt trip me. A few years after college, she invited me to live with her, claiming she'd support me while I looked for a job in her city. I was curious, so I said I'd consider it. Within days, though, she was back to her old ways, saying things like, "When you move here, you can start paying rent right away," and "It's about time you started taking care of me." I hung up the phone and never brought it up again. Eventually, my mom realized she wasn't going to get the support she wanted from me or my sister. Instead, she leaned on extended family members and even strangers, spinning sob stories to gain sympathy. She still refused to take responsibility for her choices, blaming her failed relationships, her mental health, and even us for how her life turned out. One of the most ironic moments came when she called me, furious that her subsidized housing apartment wasn't up to her standards. "I deserve better than this," she said. I reminded her that she'd had every opportunity to build a better life, but chose to squander it. "You always told me to rely on myself," I said, "so maybe you should try it too." Over time, our relationship became more distant. I still called her occasionally out of obligation, but I never let her get too close. I couldn't trust her, and I didn't want her drama interfering with my life. She even stood me up on my birthday one year, which only reinforced my decision to keep her at arm's length. I learned to celebrate holidays and milestones with my dad, stepmom, and the family I built for myself. Despite everything, I don't hold resentment. My mom taught me some harsh but valuable lessons about independence and self-worth. I realized that while I couldn't change her, I could break free from her influence and build a life I was proud of. Cutting ties with my mom emotionally was one of the hardest but healthiest decisions I ever made. Over the years, I learned to separate my identity from the person she wanted me to be. Her manipulation and guilt trips no longer worked on me. I finally saw her for who she was, a person stuck in her own cycles of self-destruction, someone who refused to take responsibility for her actions. Our relationship now is civil but distant. I still call her occasionally, but I don't involve her in my life beyond surface-level updates. If she asks for help, I politely decline. I've built boundaries that protect my peace, and I don't feel guilty about it anymore. My sister and I often laugh about her old tactics and remind each other how far we've come since those chaotic days. On the flip side, my bond with my dad and stepmom has only grown stronger. They've shown me what healthy support looks like and how family can step up when it truly matters. Thanks to them, I was able to graduate from college, find stability, and pursue my goals. They've become the rock I always wished I had as a kid, and I'm grateful for them every day. As for my mom, she's still the same. She complains about her living situation and laments that no one wants to take her in. But I've stopped letting her drama consume me. I remind myself that I tried to help her in the past, and she pushed me away. Her choices led her to where she is now, not mine. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you can't force people to change. You can only control your own actions and protect your own happiness. It's a lesson that came with a lot of pain, but it's one that shaped me into a stronger, more resilient person. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Let's keep these important conversations going.